So today we're going to go over the secret to the million-mile engine and transmission. Now, if you guys notice, about every 6 months to a year, there's a new article that pops up online of some person managing to achieve 1,000,000 miles out of their original engine and transmission in a particular vehicle. And the internet then becomes absolutely obsessed with what oil they're using, how often they're changing it, are they using any additives, and what about the transmission? What fluid are they using in the transmission? Are they putting any additives in the transmission, and how often are they servicing it? And the thing is about this, typically, the internet, like I said, will bombard this person with a bunch of these maintenance questions, and then usually a couple weeks after this article comes out, the vehicle manufacturer will offer that person a brand new vehicle. And if you think about it, it's actually genius marketing by the vehicle manufacturer because, well, in reality, it's not the oil that the person's using, it's not the maintenance intervals, it is how the vehicle is being driven. So as a vehicle manufacturer, if you hand this person a brand new vehicle that's achieved 1,000,000 miles, they're pretty darn likely to be able to do it again, regardless of the brand of vehicle that they're actually driving. And I'm gonna prove it to you today in this video, hopefully. So this can go and give manufacturers great reputations for reliability. I'm not saying, some brands don't have better reliability than others, but what I'm saying here is there is a fundamental reason why a person can get 1,000,000 miles out of a vehicle, and chances are, well, you can't. Now, I've been creating content on YouTube for about 9 years at this point, and I'll be honest, this is probably one of my most favorite videos that I've ever made, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take what you think you know about engines and just completely flip it on its head. Because after this video, you're gonna look at motor oil and maintenance maybe a little bit differently than, just change it religiously every 3,000 miles with the super ultra platinum, whatever oil that somebody says is the best this month. So with all that in mind, credit where credit's due, the idea for this video actually came from Jamin off of the Freedom Works channel. Jamin actually brought some legit SAE documentation to a video that actually laid out why engines wear out and what you can do to ultimately make your engine last longer. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what keeps an engine alive is reducing the amount of wear in the bore and the amount of wear on the rings. If you keep the rings in good shape and the bore in good shape, that engine will last an extremely long time. So for you to be able to understand what makes an engine last 1,000,000 miles, you need to be able to understand what makes an engine worn out and what causes an engine to wear out. So a 4-stroke internal combustion engine is simply a piston and a cylinder, and that piston goes up and down in the cylinder, and inside the cylinder you've got explosions that drive the piston down that turn a crankshaft, and that crankshaft is connected to the transmission, which ultimately is connected to the wheels. So the longer that you can maintain the seal between the piston ring and the cylinder wall, the longer that engine is going to last. The reason I say that is, think about it. If your engine is burning oil like crazy and it's smoking blue and it's down on power, what are you gonna say? You're gonna say, oh, I need to rebuild the engine, right? Nobody out there takes an engine that runs strong, that has low oil pressure, and rebuilds it. If the engine runs okay, typically you're gonna keep driving it. But ultimately, what keeps an engine from running is that seal between the piston ring and cylinder wall. So once that seal starts to degrade between the piston ring and the cylinder wall, well, the engine's considered worn out. You send it out for a rebuild or just replace the engine, whatever you choose to do. So what these 1,000,000-mile cars are actually doing is they are keeping that seal between the piston ring and cylinder wall for an extremely long amount of time, allowing them to accumulate 1,000,000 miles. How are they actually able to do this? Well, if you start looking at all of these 1,000,000-mile engines, they all have one thing in common, and it's not the brand, it's not the driver, it's not the maintenance. It is how the vehicles are driven. All of these 1,000,000-mile cars that you will see, they accumulate 1 million miles in, let's say, 5 to 10 years. There are very, very, very few million-mile, 30-year-old vehicles that have the original engine and transmission. So this is the paperwork that Jamin brought to my attention. It is SAE paper 2006-01-3413. It is titled Effective Lubricant Properties and Lubricant Degradation on Piston Ring and Cylinder Bore Wear in a Spark Ignition Engine. As you would imagine, it is rather heavy reading, and I'm not going to sit here and read this thing to you verbatim because, well, I'm sure the SAE wouldn't appreciate me plagiarizing their work and making it out there public. The SAE does sell this paperwork if you guys want to buy it. It's about 40 bucks. It's about 15 pages long. I will put a link down to it in the description if you guys want to purchase it. I don't get any commission from it or anything. I'm just saying if you guys want to look up, anything I'm showing you in this video, you're more than welcome to do so. So what this paperwork essentially talks about is GM did a study in 2006 with a bunch of 3.4 liter V6 engines where they installed radioactive piston rings on these engines, and then they monitored the amount of radioactivity in the oil because, well, there's only one place that radioactive particles in the oil could have come from. It came from the piston rings because that's the only radioactive part in the engine. So they tested this, I believe, with multiple different types of oil. They don't specify what brands, but you can see there, multiple oil samples were tested here. It's not like they just tested, one sample of Walmart Super Tech and called it good and wrote an SAE paper. No, they did their due diligence here and they tested multiple different brands. They don't say who, but if you buy the paperwork, it clearly spells out, what SAE grades they bought and blah, blah, blah. So what they ultimately found was there's a direct correlation between the temperature of the engine and the amount of wear in the engine. And what they found is from a cold start, the wear rate of the engine is 20 times higher at cold start than what it is at full operating temperature. And it really didn't seem to matter too much what oil they used. Those numbers pretty much correlate with no matter whose oil you're using. One thing that they did call out in that paperwork that I found super interesting was, like I said, from a cold start, they said the wear rate was 20 times higher at cold start than what it was at hot idle, at full operating temperature. But what's interesting about that 20 times greater, they said the wear rate at that cold start was equivalent to running your engine at wide open throttle at full operating temperature. So if you started at cold start and let it idle for 20 minutes, or you hop in your car at full operating temperature and run it wide open for 20 minutes, the wear rate was the same. That I thought was just crazy. So when you start looking at all these million-mile engines, this is how they're able to last such a long time. It's not the maintenance. Yes, the maintenance factors into it, but it's not the brand of vehicle. It is how these vehicles are being driven. These vehicles are doing a high number of miles per cold start, which preserves the seal between the piston ring and cylinder wall. Therefore, the engine lasts a long period of time. Somebody like you or me with an average commute is not going to be able to get 1 million miles out of their engine. It's simply not going to happen because, like with this car, you're going to drive it 20 miles and cold start it again. Whereas one of these million-mile vehicles, they may drive 800 to 1,000 miles before that vehicle's cold started again. They do 100,000 miles a year, some of these people, or more. So this is how all of these engines are able to last so long. It's not brand loyalty, it's not maintenance, it's just how these vehicles are being driven. But this whole thing sort of brings up another question for me, is can I replicate this with my own car? So if I preheat my own engine, what does that do to my used oil analysis and the wear rate of my engine? So if I don't ever cold start the engine, what does that do for the engine life? So let's find out. Now, in order to preheat this engine, I installed an oil pan heater and a block heater in this 2008 Honda Fit. Just know that this portion of the video took me about a year. I had to drive this vehicle roughly 7,800 miles to be able to get you guys this information. So What I did was I did one oil change that was about 2,600 miles without a preheat. I did a second oil change that was, again, 2,600 miles with a preheat. So before I ever started the engine, I got it up to about 130 degrees or so and then fired it up. And then I did a third oil change, again, 2,600 miles, but no preheat. And guys, I'm gonna go off on a tangent here for a second. Do not try this. This is absolutely stupid. And to give you an idea of the amount of aggravation that I went through to try and do this, to get you guys this information, here's the best example I can give you. So when you change your oil and you add that, 3-4 quarts of oil, whatever that engine takes, what's the first thing you typically do? You typically get in the car, fire it up, shut it back off and check the level, right? Well, by doing what I'm showing you in this video with this preheat deal, you turned a half hour, 1 hour long oil change into a 3.5 hour ordeal because you have to preheat the engine just to check the oil level. So this is, like I said, this is a completely stupid thing to do, but for you guys, I did it. And just to give you guys even further clarification of how dumb this is, my wife is a paint chemist. If you guys have ever seen like that desert tan Toyota Tacoma from the last generation Tacoma, my wife developed that paint. So what I'm saying is my wife is extremely tolerant of what I do out here and some of these experiments that I do, and science and data and experiments and working in a lab and all that stuff. She's all about it. She looked at what I did here and she goes, I have no idea what you're trying to prove here, but this is the absolute stupidest thing you've ever tried to do in the 9 years that you've been on YouTube. And she's right. Here's why. So it takes roughly 2.5 hours to preheat this car to get it to up to 130, 140 degrees, depending on what the outside ambient temperature is. And then if you drive the vehicle somewhere, you cannot be at that place long enough for the vehicle to cool down, otherwise it null and voids your entire experiment. So I would take my wife to the grocery store in this Honda, preheat it for 1.5 hours, 2 hours, whatever it took, and then we'd get to the grocery store and I'm rushing my wife through the grocery store saying, we have to get back to the car because the car cannot cool down. If it cools down, my whole experiment is screwed. And basically it got to the point where she didn't want to be involved in this car in any way, shape, or form for about 3 months while I was doing this preheat deal. So, like I said, doesn't make much sense at all. Your wife is not going to tolerate it. And when you start looking at the financial aspect of it, that we'll take a look at a little bit later here, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all. So as far as the oil we're going to be using for this test, we're going to be using Pennzoil Ultra Platinum 5W30, widely regarded as one of the better oils out on the market. I'm going to be pairing that with a standard Wix filter. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do 3 different oil changes, 2,600 miles a piece. So with all that, well, let's take a look at the results here. Okay, so what I have on the screen now is what is called a used oil analysis. So these are used typically by fleets, and what they use them for is to determine when they actually need to change the oil in all of their fleet vehicles. So think about it. If you have a fleet of 100 trucks and you can extend out the oil change interval 1,000 miles on each one of those trucks, well, it's going to save you quite a bit of money over a long period of time. So these fleets will use these used oil analysis to determine, okay, do we actually need to change the oil in all these vehicles or not? So if you look at this chart, I have 3 different oil changes on this chart. So the sample on the far right, that is going to be an unheated used oil sample. The sample in the middle, that is going to be the heated sample in this test. And then the sample on the far left is going to be, again, an unheated sample. So you can plainly see here, when you look down toward the bottom at all the different wear metals, you have to understand when you pour motor oil into your engine, that motor oil does not have iron, chromium, copper, tin, lead, aluminum, manganese, nickel, or titanium in it. So brand new motor oil, all those numbers would be 0. So when you start looking at
the numbers here pretty much across the board with all of these wear metals that you see at the bottom on these 3 different used oil analysis, you want these numbers to be as absolutely low as possible across the board. Well, if you notice here, the used oil sample that's in the middle that was heated, the numbers are quite a bit lower than what they were with the other 2 unheated samples. So this is further proof that, you know what I did here does in fact actually work. And it cut the wear in this engine by roughly half. So yeah, this has a very tangible effect on the overall lifespan of your engine. But what you have to understand is, well, how convenient is doing something like this? The amount of inconvenience that we're going to talk about later is absolutely massive if you're going to do this every single day to your vehicle. But in a cold climate, yeah, there is a very tangible benefit to using a block heater or oil pan heater versus nothing at all.
Now, the other factor that has to be considered here is the cost of electricity. So the block heater was 400 watts and the oil pan heater that I used was another 150. So in total, you're looking at 550 watts every time you plug this thing in. And that spread out over a couple of years, that is going to have a very tangible amount shown up on your electric bill. So every time I would plug this in, I would plug it in for roughly between 2 and 3 hours, depending on the outside temperature. And to do that, my electricity is fairly cheap. It's around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And you're looking around, 11, 12 cents every time that I would preheat this thing. I understand, not huge, but again, if you do that every day, twice a day for a year, that's at the end of the year, that's a pretty tangible amount of money. And the thing that you need to understand about this little Honda is, well, I can buy one of these engines for a fit. They're all day long on eBay. I can find them between $700 and $1,000. So at a certain point, if you left that block heater plugged in 24/7, you're going to spend roughly $500 in electricity at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So at that point, well, you could just buy another engine in a couple of years. So for an application like this, really doesn't make much sense. Now, if you have some sort of high-end race engine, something like that, absolutely, yeah, I could see, the justification of doing something like this. But the amount of inconvenience, I cannot stress enough with this. Like I was saying, perfect example is there was a couple times when I went to drive this thing, I had it plugged in, it was raining outside, and the rain and the water got in the plug for the block heater, tripped the GFCI in my garage and turned the whole thing off. So I come out to check the temperature of the car and nothing's on because the GFCI had tripped. So like I said, massive, massive inconvenience. Does it work? Absolutely. The secret to a 1,000,000-mile engine is a lack of cold starts. If you do a high number of miles for each cold start of the engine, that engine will last a long period of time. It's just, that's what GM found, that's what I found, and there's a bunch of real world examples that back up what I just said. Now, what's kind of unique about this study from GM is they tested something like 13 different types of motor oil in those GM 3.4 liter engines with the radioactive piston rings that I talked about earlier. And it really didn't seem to matter the viscosity of the oil they tried or different oil additives that they tried as far as, different levels of calcium or ZZDP or anything like that. The temperature of the engine was a exponentially greater factor in the amount of engine wear that you had versus any oil that they had tried. So before any of you guys go, well, oh, you should have tried Mobil 1, or you should have tried AMSOIL, or you should have tried, Rotella T6 or something, off the wall. GM already tried that a long time ago and found out that it really didn't make any difference what viscosity of oil they used or the type of oil that they used. The temperature is a much larger factor. This chart right here, this shows the wear rate of the piston rings versus coolant and oil temp. So this is coolant temp, oil temp, and you can clearly see when they both start to fall off, the wear rate of the rings clearly goes up, and it's remarkably consistent here. The other couple things I want you to take note of is right here. A fully formulated synthetic lubricant has similar piston ring wear rates as mineral-based formulations. So that's saying, according to what they found, conventional oil performs pretty similar to a full synthetic. And this section right here, this work demonstrates the relative importance of various lubricant characteristics on piston ring and cylinder wear. Neither severely degraded oils or a wide variation in viscosity show a significant effect on ring wear, which suggests that wear between the ring and cylinder bore may not be a roadblock to extended oil change intervals. But this bottom sentence here is key. Cold operating temperatures appear to be a very significant factor in controlling ring/bore wear. In my own scenario here, guys, I live in northeastern Ohio, and it can get, below 0 Fahrenheit around here. And the thing is, well, if you guys have a block heater, I highly recommend you guys using a block heater, because the quicker that you can get your engine up to operating temperature, the longer that engine is going to last. Now, I'm not saying go wide open throttle as soon as you start the engine up, but if you drive conservatively and just get the engine up to operating temperature as quickly as possible, well, that engine will last longer than what it will had you let it sit out in the driveway and idle for 20 minutes. And the thing is about my climate, when it gets that cold, below 0 Fahrenheit, you have to idle your engine to be able to drive the vehicle, because your breath will fog the windshield up and therefore you can't see. So if it's cold out, use a block heater, use an oil pan heater, and it will reduce the amount of engine wear that you will have, regardless of the motor oil that you actually put in your engine. Again, technical papers back it up, these million-mile engines back it up, and my own experiment backed this up. One other thing I want to mention is, I'm not sure how great the internet's memory is, but I don't know Dave's Auto Center at all. I have no affiliation with him at all. I've never spoken to him in any way, shape, or form. But Dave at Dave's Auto Center went through the absolute ringer about probably a year, 18 months ago, telling you guys that you shouldn't be idling your vehicle in the driveway in cold temperatures, and to get in it and simply drive it conservatively to get it up to operating temperature. And the internet went absolutely bananas, telling him he didn't know what he was talking about, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. There's documentation here to prove that Dave did in fact know what he was talking about. My experiment backs that up, and again, so does all these million-mile engines. So you guys can do whatever you want with your vehicle, but if you want to ensure that your vehicle lasts a long period of time, I would say if it's below 32 degrees outside, just consider plugging in your block heater if you have one, because the quicker you get your engine to operating temperature, the less wear that you're going to have in that engine, regardless of the motor oil you're going to use. So as I was doing research for this video, I kind of came across a smoking gun. I came across a channel called Powerstroke Maintenance, and he interviewed the owner of a 922,000 mile 6.7 Powerstroke. And I'll take you right up here in the corner. I will link it. I'll link this clip if you guys want to see the full video. I think it's like close to a half-hour long, where he talks through pretty much everything about this truck. But I found a spot in the video where the owner of the truck specifically talks about plugging in the block heater religiously.
Always plug it in too.
Plug it in.
I always plug it in. If I'm, let me qualify that. If I'm somewhere where I have an outlet,
Okay.
I will always plug it in unless it's in a garage.
Okay.
Always. Even if it's, okay, in the summer, of course I don't, but the fall and winter, early spring.
Yeah.
Late winter, early spring, always plug it in if it's like below 40.
Okay.
Now the final thing I want to talk about here is, well, why does this actually work? And there's a few different things that are actually going on when you preheat your engine. So first of which is the engine doesn't run nearly as rich as what it does on a cold start. So when you cold start an engine, the engine absolutely just dumps fuel into the cylinders, first of all, to get the engine running and then get it up to temperature. And because of that, well, you're more likely to have fuel dilution make it past the piston, past the rings, and down into the oil. And the fuel in the oil naturally doesn't lubricate as well as motor oil itself. So the higher the fuel dilution becomes, the more wear that you are going to have in the engine. This actually coincides with what I saw with my used oil analysis. If you go back and look at my used oil analysis, the two unheated samples on my used oil analysis had roughly 2 to 3 times the amount of fuel in the oil as what the heated sample did. Because again, by preheating the engine doesn't run nearly as rich. The other thing that goes along with this is at that warmer temperature, the fuel atomizes better. So again, it's less likely to make it into the crankcase. The other part of this is the running tolerances of the engine. So the piston is going to be closer to what size it normally is as the engine's being driven. The rings are closer to the correct size as when the engine is actually being driven. And the bore is, again, going to be similar to the normal size of what it is when the vehicle's driving down the road. So because of that, you have a better seal between the piston ring, cylinder wall, and the piston itself, which then leads to less fuel dilution in the oil. So all of that is contributing to lower fuel dilution in the oil, which again, is contributing to less wear. Now, I spoke about this to Lake Speed Jr. when him and I shot the diesel fuel additive video. It came out about a month ago. I mentioned to him what I was doing with this vehicle, and I just kind of asked for his opinion on what could possibly be going on here. And he brought up a point that never really even occurred to me. Lake mentioned that the additives in the oil, so think like the calcium, the zinc, the phosphorus, things like that in the oil itself is designed to work best at operating temperature. So those additives in the oil, again, want to be at operating temperature. So if you take that oil and you move it outside of the range that it's designed to work in, well, you're gonna have more wear because the oil itself is designed to work at, let's say, 200 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the closer you get it to that point, the less wear you're gonna have. Hopefully all that makes sense. So that's pretty much what I have for this video, guys. I will have links down in the description to Jamin's channel, to the Powerstroke maintenance channel, as well as to some block heaters and to some oil pan heaters, as well as some motor oil if you guys want to take a look at any of the different stuff that we were talking about in this video. So as always, guys, if you guys like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content, go down and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.